afternoon. Today we're going to be talking about stable finances. And with us today is Paige Brummund, who's the Extension Agent in Agriculture and Natural Resources in Ward County, North Dakota. And Paige is going to be talking just a little bit about what it takes to afford a horse. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paige and we'll see what she has to say.
Thanks, Mary. So let's talk first about why create a budget. If you have a horse currently or are you thinking about getting one, you probably know that horses can be costly to care for. So creating a budget helps us track each dollar, understand what the true costs are. Oftentimes, maybe we underestimate or round down some expenses or overestimate others. And then once we have all those dollars and cents figured out, we can try and save where you can, or maybe focus some dollars and some portion of the budget to areas that you have been saving for and anticipate needing in the future. The other reason to create a good budget is to have a plan for emergencies. Always give yourself a small cushion, a 5 or a 10% cushion. Have that stashed away in a savings account or a way to access in case of an emergency. And then also, if you intend to run a business or you are running a business with your horses, you want to ensure that you are able to remain profitable. And if your horses are a hobby or a pastime or more of a pet, you want to ensure that you're able to care for that horse in the long term. So let's talk what makes North Dakota unique when it comes to caring for your horse. We are a rural state. It is a long distance to go from end to end and across the state. Oftentimes it can take hours to get to where we're going. So whether that's our veterinarians, our farriers, maybe competitions or recreational riding, maybe just to pick up supplies and feed for your horse, it's quite a commute. The availability of services and supplies can be a challenge as well. So while we might have an abundance of some of those supplies, such as feed, North Dakota has many, many acres, agriculture state that has plenty of hay production. That might be something that is an abundant and easy to come by. But something like emergency care, in the case of, a horse colicking and needing surgery, might be quite limited and require quite a haul for most horse owners. The other thing to consider is that the climate in North Dakota goes without saying, it's pretty extreme here. And the winter often has additional challenges and additional expenses that horse owners in warmer climates might not have to work with. And while we have wide open spaces, the availability of land sometimes can be limited. Also, a lack of available labor. So when we ask people, what are some of the limitations or challenges for caring for horses in North Dakota, these are some of the common responses. So before we get too far into the weeds on our budget for this year, I want to focus on a couple things. First, these are examples from a North Dakota horse owner. And I hesitate to say average because I don't think there's any such thing as average when it comes to a budget. These numbers that we talk about today will be based off of 2025, the year 2025. So that can change from year to year. In years of drought, maybe hay prices go up and those sorts of examples. So again, keep in mind that the numbers mentioned today won't be right for everyone, or I'd even say that they won't be right for any one person either. So what I challenge you as a participant is, as we kind of go along today and talk about these expenses, write down what your estimates are to care for your horse as you follow along. And then later you can go back and find receipts or get quotes and calculate what the actual expenses would be. Some additional considerations would be to calculate the total expense that you have for your horses for the entire year, whether you have one horse or 20 horses or more. Calculate that total lump sum. You can also figure it out by month and by day. Some seasons might be more expensive than others for you. In the summer, you might have more grooming supplies, fly spray, fly control, pasture management expenses. In the winter, maybe you have extra hay, snow removal, those sorts of things. Okay, so calculate those month to month as well. And then you might want to consider calculating individual horse expenses. Does your senior horse with special medications and extra feed requirements cost more or less than your younger horse that maybe you're currently sending out to training for a portion of the year? So sometimes that's helpful to know too on an individual horse basis what it's costing you. So another thing before we get started into the specifics is to consider what is required, the minimum requirements to care for a horse versus optional expenditures. So the minimum requirements, things like feed and water, shelter, space or land for your horse to be located on, basic veterinary care, basic farrier care, and just the essential equipment needed to have a horse. Make sure that those are covered first and accounted for first in your budget. That's what would require if you didn't do anything with your horse, you didn't haul, you didn't go anywhere, you didn't ride them, these things would still need to be taken care of. And then the optional expenditures, that's where you can kind of dream big and have a little bit of fun. So maybe that's new tack, maybe some extra spot treatments for your horse, different supplements that you wanted to try. Prioritize what maybe your goals are after you dream big, and then you can always reduce your budget to fit the reality of what's going to work for you. So let's get into just some of the highlights. So again, I challenge you to jot some of these things down if you know off the top of the head what they cost you, and then we can research later and figure out a good budget for your horse. So let's think about if you own your facility or will be purchasing a facility. Maintenance and repairs is a big one. So the different buildings, do you have a barn? Do you have a run-in shelter? Do you have an arena? What are your fences like? What type of fence? And what are the different costs for those type of fences? Different feeders. Are you going to have stalls? Are you going to build an arena? What about some of the equipment that you need? Whether it be some of the larger equipment listed below, like tractors and skid steers, snowplows, drags, sprayers, mowers, manure spreaders, all of those equipment things that come with owning a horse. Some of those pieces of equipment would be smaller, pitchforks, wheelbarrows, buckets, those sorts of things. Next, think about your utilities. So if you have it separate from your house, that helps you kind of narrow down what your barn and horses cost. If it's a part of your horse, you'll have to figure a percentage, and maybe that's going to change from season to season. So think about water, electricity, propane, internet, septic, those sorts of expenses, and whether they're needed to go into your horse budget as well. Think about regular improvements. Do you have things that you want to improve on your property 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, immediately? Calculate and budget for those. Custom hire is going to be anything that you either don't have the equipment for, or you don't have the skill set for, or you don't have the time for, or a variety of other reasons why you might hire somebody else to do the task. Like we mentioned earlier in North Dakota, a shortage of labor is an issue. So sometimes people by default end up having to do some of the tasks and the jobs that they would like to hire out. We have to budget for those as well. Also consider depreciation on the different items we just talked about, your equipment, and then also your interest expense if you're having to borrow money to either purchase or operate and maintain your facility. Consider that as well. Some additional things in the summer, we have pasture mowing, weed control, fertilizers, and the equipment that goes with that. Often we forget about dirt work and drainage, and I know Mary talks about this, especially with manure management and how important that is, making sure that your water is running out of your pens and away from your buildings, and oftentimes that needs to be done annually or a few times a year. You have the equipment, or you can custom hire that out to maintain your property. Think about that manure removal or spreading or hauling away. The snow movement, or in the winter, we got a storm coming up here in the next couple of days that's going to require some of that. When that snow melts or the rains comes, we have muds to manage, we have bugs in the summer, and then it dries out and we have dust to control. So there's always something to think about, and make sure that we throw those into our horse budget. Heat and cooling might be something that you have if you're utilizing a building. At minimum, you're going to need heat for the winter time to keep your waterers open. Or maybe you have a heated indoor arena that you're looking at paying for as well. Cooling kind of goes the same way. Maybe you just have a couple box fans, or maybe you have a full facility with air conditioning. Definitely going to be drastically different amounts in your budget for that. Next, think about water. Do you have rural water or a well or a city source, and what are the difference in expenses there? Are you providing in tank or automatic waterers? And then how about your fencing installation and upkeep and repairs? Will drastically be different depending upon what type of fence. Are you putting in steel, continuous panels, temporary electric? A lot of different options. Let's move on to considering our feed and talk a little bit about that. So just as a rough estimate, if you were to purchase high quality round bale alfalfa from your neighbor who lives down the road, he's going to deliver it to you, say, for $125 a ton. If you figure that out on, say, a 1,600 or so pound bale, you're looking at 7 cents a pound. If you calculate your average horse, we're going to plan for 30 pounds a day, including a little bit of waste. Roughly, you're looking at about $2 per day in hay to feed your horse. Then you got to consider, are you feeding that year round, or are you going to also have an option to graze your horse? Being in North Dakota, we know that our grazing season is short. You're looking at possibly 4, maybe 5 months of grazing if the rains are timely and allow for optimal growth. If not, you could simply budget for your hay for year round, and oftentimes that's recommended just so that you have a little bit of extra cushion in making sure that you do have enough forage to get your horse through the year. Some of the other feed costs would include concentrates or grains and vitamins and minerals, and this will vary depending upon the life stage of your horse, their body condition score, and what you do with them. This could range anywhere from very, very minimal, less than 50 cents a day, upwards of many, many dollars, depending upon your individual needs. Supplements are oftentimes optional and dependent upon your horse. You want to calculate those on your actual costs. And then salt is something that's always required that is a minimal cost that could be added into that concentrate and grain. So for the sake of averages, we can say another $2 to $3 on concentrates and grains for your horse. So what if you're thinking, okay, I'm not buying a facility, I don't operate one, I don't have the land available, I'm looking at boarding options in North Dakota. And there's a few different things that you'd want to think about. So the first one is if your boarding option would be a full care facility, and that would be all inclusive, where they would cover all of those supplies and equipments and feed that we just talked about above. So say if you could only get out to see your horse once a week or once a month or once a year, you know that your horse would be fully taken care of at that boarding full care facility. Some boarding options in North Dakota are called partial care, and this really varies in definition, and you have to ask the provider on what is included. Partial care for some might mean they only provide hay and you have to provide any grain or supplements. You have to come out and feed that yourself every day. Or maybe they'll provide care only during the weekdays, but on the weekends you have to provide care for your horse. It might be very, very different from barn to barn. So asking those questions on a partial care boarding option is essential. Self-care facilities usually include the facility only. So the boarder would provide all feed and be required to come out every single day to check on their horse. The boarding facility owner is only providing that space for your horse to live. Other options might be short-term care. So maybe you're going on a long vacation and you want to take your horse so that it's looked after, or pay somebody to come and look after your horse at your property. Those are things to budget for. Or maybe your work doesn't allow you to get out regularly and you're going to do that for a short period of time elsewhere. Another option that we see in North Dakota is pasture only, and this can be a lower cost option, but usually is only going to work out for those few months in the summer where pasture is going to be available and provide some nutritional requirements for your horse. We know in the winter pasture is not going to sustain a horse. You need to have hay and shelter and a liquid water source as well. When you're shopping around and looking at boarding facilities, consider all the different amenities and what the individual requirements for you and your horse are. So looking at their fence, do they have a space to ride? Do they have a space to store items? Those sorts of things all come into play, along with the atmosphere, the number of horses that are in each individual pen, how they sort horses, how they introduce new horses to each other. Those are all questions to consider. So hopefully you're thinking, okay, do I own my property or am I going to board? And from there, you're still going to have additional expenses such as vet costs. So an annual exam is recommended for every horse. Usually budgeting a couple $100s for that is recommended. Vaccines, even if you don't go anywhere with your horse, the core vaccines are going to run approximately $50. If you're traveling frequently, the recommendations increase. We've talked about some of these in other webinars as well, specifically. But as far as cost, you'll want to definitely double or triple the budget for your vaccine. Same on your health paperwork. When you travel across the state and out of state, there's different requirements for some facilities that you go to. So you want to budget another couple $100s for there. So we're kind of seeing a kind of a pattern here. Couple $100, and a couple $100. It definitely adds up. Dental care, the same thing. If we look at one time a year, $200. Minor issues for vet care expenses sometimes might be able to be treated yourself, especially if you have a first aid kit that's adequate and adequate first aid training. And also sometimes noticing those minor issues that you can treat at home. Maybe there's a small scrape that you can clean up and treat and prevent it from becoming infected and requiring a trip to the vet. You also want to make sure that you have emergency medical funds set aside and know what that might be or what that potential cost could be. Maybe a minor colic surgery could be anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000. Maybe if you're looking at something that is treatable or the colic didn't go into surgery, maybe you're looking at under $1,000. So knowing those, asking your veterinarians what you could expect and what common emergencies are in the area helps you plan and budget appropriately. Farrier expenses. Every horse is going to need quality hoof care. So the regular care schedule is recommended every 5 to 8 weeks. So even at a basic trim ranging anywhere from $40 to $80, you'll want to factor that in for the entire year. Some people do stretch their horses a little bit longer in the winter, but 5 to 8 weeks is the recommendation. If your horse is barefoot, it's going to be a little lower in cost. If you're needing shoes, you'll want to budget that. Is it going to be just front shoes for under $100, or are we looking for maybe some specialty shoeing that could be a couple $100s each time? And then consider your mileage expense. Because we talked about the services are sometimes limited in North Dakota, is your farrier able to come to you, or do you have to haul to your farrier or another facility where you can get enough horses together to make sure that you get your horse trimmed at the appropriate timing? So we move on to transportation considerations. So if you're going to take your horse anywhere, these are things you need to consider, as well as having a backup plan if you don't. So there are horse owners that don't have a pickup and trailer or a tow vehicle or trailer, but then you'd want to have a friend or a neighbor or somebody that you can call in case of an emergency. But either way, a pickup or a tow vehicle is going to range greatly, right? So you might be able to get down the road, a few miles or close by for a low cost vehicle under $10,000, or maybe you're hauling across the country and need something a little bit more reliable. Trailers go the same way. It can be anywhere from a couple $1,000s to well over 6 figures. So these are highly variable, where you want to figure out what's realistic for you and maybe what a goal is down the road. Insurance on those vehicles and trailers, consider that. And then the good old fuel cost. This is something we can calculate because it's pretty standard for everybody. Right now we're looking at $3.55 a gallon for a gallon of diesel anyway. And say your vehicle is going to get 10 miles per gallon, you're looking at a little over 36 miles per 36 cents per mile in fuel expense. The current IRS mileage rate is 70 cents a mile. And that typically doesn't cover all of the maintenance required, especially on these tow vehicles. But it's another way to look at it to factor in, on average, what it would cost you to run that vehicle down the road. You want to consider repairs. Sometimes those are unexpected, but have a cushion in there for that. And then, of course, your regular maintenance, depending upon how much you're using your vehicle. So your tires, oil changes, filters, all those sorts of things. And then your emergency toolkit for problems that you may encounter down the road. All right, supplies. Sometimes these are the more fun things to list and think about. So what do you have for grooming supplies, and how often are you replacing them and going through them on your operation for your horses? Fly sprays, grooming sprays, bathing supplies and brushes, fly control. So are you sheeting your horse? Are you putting fly masks on? Are you using sprays, traps, feed through fly controls? How about tack and equipment? How often are you upgrading that? Saddles, saddle pads, bridles, reins, bits, halters, lead ropes, all those things. Blankets might be highly seasonal. Some people blanket, some people don't. Factor that in according to your care preferences. And then what about clothing for yourself? So oftentimes our equine events require a unique clothing that maybe not every day-to-day outfit covers. So your daily riding clothes, and then also if you're competing, oftentimes there's specific dress code appropriate attire for those events. Keep in mind stable supplies. So pitchforks, wheelbarrows, buckets, and feeders are some of the considerations there. Next, we're going to talk about recreation because we have horses for a reason. A lot of times it's to enjoy them through riding or taking them places, socializing with friends, and various other things. So whether you are competing or maybe you're just going and taking lessons or entering a clinic and learning from a professional, maybe you're trail riding or other things that you might do with your horse, budget these in. So you have entry fees, maybe park fees or trail maintenance fees, stalling, shavings, practices, association fees. All that hauling mileage that we talked about before adds up if you're hauling any significant distance. That health and travel paperwork that we talked about at the vet. And then the other thing we forget about sometimes is while we're away, the hotels, the RV hookups, parking, generator expenses, food expenses, and those sorts of items. We want to have fun with our horses, so factor those budget items in. The next, we're just going to touch briefly on training and breeding. So training in North Dakota might range depending upon what services you are requesting, as little as $800 or well over $2,000 a month. Oftentimes that's full care. So the board and feed is included, so you wouldn't have those additional expenses while your horse is in training. Sometimes they include lessons as well, so that's an added benefit or a perk. Breeding is highly variable, and we visited a little bit about the costs of breeding in our spring webinars this year, back in April. The initial cost can be very, very little, or it can be quite a lot. So here we listed anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000 plus just to get your mare in foal, depending upon how the stud fee, what your vet charges, how close they are, how many cycles it took for your mare to conceive, and so on and so forth. Of course, then you're going to have the continued care of that mare through gestation and lactation with those additional feed and healthcare requirements, as well as taking care of that newborn foal into adulthood as well. So breeding really, really adds up in a hurry. Sometimes you may have profit potential or perceived profit potential if you intend to sell that foal. Insurance is a big one, okay? So this is something that you're going to visit with your different insurance providers to get quotes on and figure out what works best for you, but here's some considerations. What does your homeowner's insurance cover and not cover? Do you need farm liability insurance? And what does that cover and not cover, and what level is that at? What about your farm assets? Are you going to insure those, and at what level? What's required, what's optional for your truck and trailer, buildings, equipment, that sort of thing. And then horse mortality or major medical insurance. Typically, your mortality insurance can run anywhere from 2 to 4% of your purchase price as an annual premium. And that varies greatly as well. So those are those individual costs to price out. All right, so maybe you're thinking, gosh, this is adding up. I didn't think about all these expenses. Sometimes people say, well, I'm gonna have a business opportunity so that I can make a little bit money while also enjoying my horses. And that's certainly an option. Some people do choose to provide services as well. So maybe they board horses, they have room for more on their facility. Maybe they're a feed dealer, equipment dealer, or providing some of the therapies for horses. Often these require additional certifications, licenses, and training, and they're all going to require a fair bit of your investment in time and expertise. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on how to consider your value of time. So these are some rough examples of expense estimates. And when we're wrapped up here today, I'll share a spreadsheet where we can run through just a couple examples of how we came to these figures. So in the low range, you can take care of a horse for as little as $2,500 a year. This is annual. If you don't consider all of the fixed costs. So maybe you already have livestock and cattle and property, and those are fixed sunk costs into another business enterprise. And that horse is just a little additional expense. Some people in that low range are looking more up towards that 7,500. You get to the mid-range, some of those more optional expenditures and more recreational type things, and it might be up to 25,000. And then the high range is really limitless. So we were just talking a little bit ago about some of the information floating around right after the NFR on what it costs to go there. And it really can be limitless on some of the expenses that come in. So well over six figures oftentimes can potentially get spent if so desired, and if you have the funds and the finances to do so. So let's switch gears here. We don't want to overwhelm ourselves, and we don't want to think, gosh, I'm never going to be able to afford a horse. There's a lot of different ways that you can save, and you can take care of a horse adequately on a budget. So a couple of those tips are buying feed in season. So stocking up on feed in the summer when it's right off the field, when it's high in quantity. Oftentimes it is more affordable than waiting and purchasing feed in a dry year or when supplies are decreasing. Buy in bulk if you can. Round bales are very common in North Dakota and much more affordable than small square bales. You just have to decide if you're able to handle them, if you have the facility and ability to do so. Minimize waste. So cover and store hay off the ground, use feeders. And in our webinar series, we have a lot of great information and tips and tricks to help you with your feed management as well. Coordinate your farrier, vet, and other professionals. So either find a friend and horse pool, load up and share the trip if you're having to haul to these professionals, or maybe you can gather together at one facility and share or split that mileage. Preventative care saves. So we don't want to forget to do those annual exams and making sure you're checking on your horses and finding small problems before they become big problems. Definitely preventing disease through vaccination, all are recommended. Make a list of what things that you're comfortable or what skills you have that you can do it yourself. So if it's feasible to DIY your horse care, see if you can do that. Don't be afraid to shop around and check for the best price. Do consider your value of time when doing this. So, sometimes we hear stories of people that are spending hours and hours shopping around to save, pennies in the end. So consider the amount of time that you're doing that. Maybe it's worth paying a couple extra dollars for a bag of feed if you can go pick it up locally rather than spending hours and maybe paying a little bit less. Wait for sales at the end of the season. So if you're buying, I always think of this in terms of like fly control equipment often goes on sale in the fall. Winter equipment often goes on sale in the spring. So wait for those sales and stock up as needed. And evaluate the effectiveness of the different products that you're using. If you're buying a fly spray and it's not controlling the flies, maybe you need to try different brands, pay a little more, pay a little less, depending upon what it is. Same with supplements, with conditioners. Are there science that backs that these are working? How do you know that those products are working? So maybe it's worth your time to research and evaluate the effectiveness. Here's a few more things to think about. So, goal setting and prioritization. If you have certain goals, you want to be able to get on at least 3 family trail rides this year, where you're going to haul somewhere and ride at a state park. Maybe that's a goal that you want to set. Maybe you want to compete, at X number of shows or rodeos or whatever it might be. Set those goals and prioritize and decide what you need to do to get there. Maybe your goals are on your facility. You want to build one new stretch of fence, or you want to build a small outdoor riding space, those sorts of things. Categorize what you want versus what you need. So we've already talked about the bare minimum. Make sure that we have those covered first, and then categorize those wants with your goals and your prioritization and rank them from what you're going to tackle first and what's want, but maybe you can wait down the road until your finances and your budget allow for it. Can you save with maybe some group lessons or clinics versus private lessons, or maybe training is the better option if you get some lessons included in that? Price those out and budget accordingly. And then partial lease or full lease of your horse, if you're not utilizing them, is another way to save. So here's some important considerations when you're looking at saving money. Everybody has different seasons in their life, and this might change between different projects that you're focused on or seasons or years that you're in. Are you willing to spend more time to save money, or are you willing to spend more money to save time? And where is the balance that works best for you? So ask yourself that question for each expense item as well. Something else to briefly touch on, but it's very important. You want to consider what to do or what you'll need to do if you can no longer care for your horse, whether it's for financial reasons or a time in your life where you're just not able to. Considering rehoming or selling the horse, and you may also need to consider when humane euthanasia may be the best option. So if the horse is unsound, it has health issues, it's of a extreme age where that may be the best option, or if it's unsafe as well. So make a plan for that and budget accordingly. All right, so a quick review here. The key message that I want you to take away is calculate your own costs. We verbalized a lot of numbers. We threw a lot of numbers at you. I'm going to pull up an example spreadsheet that we can go through as well in just a moment here. But remember that no example budget is going to be right for any one person, and analyze those expenses to see where you can save, but be sure to plan for those emergencies as well. So what I want to ask of participants now is, what other expenses did we exclude that are significant in your operation? You say, wait, you never covered this, and this is a big chunk of what it costs to take care of a horse. Throw those in the chat box. And then another question I have for you is, what are ways that you save money in tight times that maybe we didn't mention, or you have a different spin or a take on it? So a little bit of discussion questions for you. Interested to hear what you have to say. We do have the resources here, and Mary will get those sent out at a later date. I am going to stop my screen share now and reshare with our example.
So as Paige
budget.
is getting her new screen up, if you have some ideas on things that you've done in tough times or other things that maybe Paige didn't put up there that you want us to consider for expenses, if you want to put those in the chat, you sure can do that while she's getting screens switched over here.
Right. So, yeah, throw those in the chat and we'll have a discussion at the end. I'm going to just scroll through this example budget, and you guys can certainly challenge these. I wouldn't even say challenge them so much as edit them on your own piece of paper at home on what you think it costs or what it costs for you. So this is just one rough example. And the way that I have this spreadsheet kind of worked out is we list the expenses over on the left, what it costs, how many times a year you have that cost. So if it's monthly, it's 12, or however many times you use it. Add that 5 or 10% cushion in. I threw a 10% cushion in, then you have the total for the year. So this is a really rough, basic budget. So let's say you have your own property, so you're not paying board. You're spending $170 on shoes 10 times a year because you've got some special shoeing requirements. Maybe you send your horse off in the winter for a few months to have some training done because you don't ride it anyway, so there's a training bill there. And that basic hay that we mentioned. Grain and supplements. This particular horse person spent about $600 or so in grain, another $600 in supplements, and so total about $1,200 a year, $100 a month in grain and supplements. Vet costs for this particular horse owner. Medications. This horse had a special medical requirement that needed some different pharmaceuticals, so they're at $1,300 a year for that. Their vaccines were $300. They do a fecal egg count twice a year. It costs them a little under $100, but then they only have to deworm, or they know they're deworming with the correct products. A little bit less, so that's at $30. They have different blood work and health paper requirements, Coggins test, EIA, testing for EIA, and that's $200 and some a year. And then their dental at about $200. Okay. The next one was their emergency vet that they were banking on. So they said, well, I want to make sure I have money for colic surgery for my horse. They planned for $5,500 with a note that they have insurance up to $10,000 in coverage. Injury or illness, they're planning for the worst and planning on $5,000 in that. Hopefully, crossing your fingers, you don't have to tap into that. And then their euthanasia cost, planning for that at $1,000. Treatments, this horse gets a lot of treatments. They have chiropractic, massage, saddle fitting, a little over $1,000 a year. Horse shows, this horse shows, they go to 4 events, so about quarterly, and spend a fair chunk of money doing that. So they have their show fees, hauling fees, those sorts of things. Different groomings and supplies, these are all miscellaneous things that we talked about that ended up being a couple $1,000s. And then their insurance and trailer maintenance. So all in all, they had $51,000 that they were budgeting for on their horse. And they said, whoa, I can't afford that, right? So they went back and said, where can we cut? They took out the emergency vet savings, which is maybe recommended, but they said, they have a different source of funds to be able to accommodate for that if that were to happen. So they cut that out. They cut their show budget in half. They cut out their new tack and grooming supplies in half. And they cut out some special care and supplements. So then they were able to cut their horse care budget in half, which is still significant for some people, but that was a reasonable amount for them for taking care of their horses. And then on our low bare minimum budget, we have a person that says, okay, if I only feed my horse, what do I need just to get through the year? Just feed and basic care. They have $760. That's at that $2 a day, approximately $2 a day. Minimum vet and farrier, they still plan for $600 for that. And then miscellaneous, because who knows what comes up. So they're thinking, well, if my water tank heater goes out or, they break a gate or something like that, they budgeted for that. And that's where it ended up in that low 2,000 range. So again, these are just examples, but it shows you the drastic differences in how people spend money on their horses and how they budget for that appropriately. All right, so with that, I am going to stop sharing and throw that resource slide back up. We can have a little discussion. So are there any questions?
Emily puts in the chat here, so the cost of purchasing a horse or a prospect wasn't mentioned. It's the only time you know exactly what the cost will be, and that is true. Might be something to budget for your kids as they're moving up, or trying something different. And so definitely the cost of what's next or what's coming. Or if you're not into it, what will it be? So that's a good point. Thanks, Emily.
Good point. So that was assuming that the horse was already paid for. It was free, even though there's no such thing as a free horse, as Emily just pointed out, right? So that, that can vary. Even if you didn't pay, maybe you paid $1 for the horse. Maybe you paid $50,000 for the horse or over 6 figures. It still costs money to take care of them. It's just at what level of care you're providing.
So Paige, a couple of things I heard as you went through is cushion is important in this. And so just having a little bit of cushion in there and knowing that you have to be flexible. If you're going to take that cushion away, be a little flexible then with the other things that come. There's needs and then there's wants. And labor is really hard to find in every industry, not just in North Dakota, but I think across the country. And so labor is something else. And then again, we can double or triple our expenses based on our wants, but not always our needs. And so as long as we're taking care of the horse at a base level, the rest of it is fun. And also maybe it fulfills what our goals are, but we need to make sure we're taking care of our base level first, that we have the horse's needs and in mind, and then go from there and be flexible with the rest of it, and it can be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people will share like, hey, I provided just the bare minimum for years and I stayed close to home and now I have the goals of doing other things. So I've saved X number of dollars because I've budgeted appropriately and now I'm going to go and spend a little bit more just this one year. And then we're going to go back to, the $2,000 a year budget. So everybody has their different wants and needs.
All right, discussion or questions for Paige? And if not, we would appreciate if you would take our poll. And then with that, we will be done for the day. We just appreciate you guys being on for our fall webinar series. And we will see you again closer to spring. And so we hope you have a great holiday season. Best of luck throughout the winter. Always get in touch with us if you have questions. And we'll see you in 2026.